We might as well get started. Good evening or even afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Bard Education's Speech of the Week. My name is Mary Hartman, and I'm Director of Education at Bard on the Beach Shakespeare Festival. We created Speech of the Week as our way to connect and to create in this virtual space when we can't gather in person. But I love the fact that we are still gathering. As we do, I'd like to invite you to take a moment wherever you are to appreciate where you are and to acknowledge the history, culture, and spirit of that place. We at Bard on the Beach are on the unceded ancestral territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh peoples. We're grateful to be here in this beautiful place, and we are grateful for the opportunity to gather with all of you. If you would like to access live captioning, you can click on the CC at the bottom on the right-hand side of your screen. Click on that and you can select show subtitle or hide subtitle as you choose. Speech of the Week is brought to you by Bard Education, and our mission is to inspire community through dynamic, engaging experiences with Shakespeare. It is bringing us so much joy to do Speech of the Week, but I have to acknowledge that it's so much work. And so I would just like to celebrate the magnificent Katie Johnstone and Melanie Heepler and Rhea Schroff and the rest of the administrative team at Bard on the Beach for helping to make this possible. I would also like to thank the sponsor of Speech of the Week, and that is Blue Shore Financial, for their generous support. For those of you who are new to Speech of the Week, welcome. And for those of you who are returning, welcome back. We have such an amazing cohort of regulars with Speech of the Week, and you are making it what it is. We know you're there, even though we can't see you, but today's the chance to observe. One of the most important things about Speech of the Week is that there's no right way to do Shakespeare. We're here to celebrate all of the different ways this text can be interpreted. And every single one of you are central to that. As we observe today, we'll be chatting with our special guest for the next little while. And as I said, we can't see you, but we know you're there. And we welcome your questions. So as you have a question, please use the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Since the chat is difficult for us to pay attention to, but we will watch the Q&A. And we will leave time at the end for questions, but we'll also just look for opportunities to slide them in whenever the conversation allows. And remember, this Thursday at 5 p.m. Pacific time, you'll have a chance to connect through our working session, which is fully interactive. And we encourage everyone to join us if you're able. There's no need to be shy. Everyone is welcome. No experience is necessary. And if you haven't had a chance to do it yet, I strongly encourage you. The community there is so welcoming, so wise, so supportive, and there's always room for more. And finally, we adore seeing your work on the videos that you've been submitting to us. So please do that so everyone can enjoy it. Now, I'm so delighted to welcome this evening's special guest artist, Ming Hudson. Ming is a performer, deviser, facilitator, director, and teacher who specializes in physical theater and the creation of new work. She's been a teaching artist for Bard Education since 2018, working in many different programs in many different roles. As a leader for our summer teen workshops, a coach for Bard Youth Fest, a mentor for the riotous youth, and a guest workshop instructor for Bard for Life. She has also worked as a teacher for Circus West and the Creative Teams program at the Arts Club, and she's currently on the faculty of the Canadian College of Performing Arts. Our Bard audiences got to enjoy Ming's performances in The Taming of the Shrew, Shakespeare in Love, Timon of Athens, and Lysistrata. She's also an actor for the Arts Club, Theater Replacement, Atomic Vaudeville, The Fire Hall, and Boca del Lupo. Ming has a BFA in acting from the University of Victoria, holds a master's in ensemble theater from Rose Bruford College, and is a graduate of the Advanced Devising Practice program at the London International School of Performing Arts. Her current project is called Art Heist, which is an international outdoor roving production she co-created and co-directed with TJ Daw for Right Angle Productions. Ming, I'm so happy you're with us. Welcome. Let's dive in.
I feel like all of my my things in my bio just make me sound like way cooler than I actually am.
They are amazing, as are you, Ming. So my favorite thing about Speech of the Week is this idea that there is no right way to do Shakespeare, that it's highly personal and unique. And hearing about every actor's process is so inspiring and illuminating. So Ming, tell us about your process. What is your practice when you are approaching a Shakespeare speech for the first time?
Great question, Mary. So my process is definitely like a two-pronged process. I like to do quite a lot of extensive text work first, and then I move that into sort of like a physical exploration. Before I like dive into like what my process is, I'm going to tell you all a story of how I got to this process. So my very, very first show at Bard on the Beach was Time of Athens, which was directed by Meg Rowe in 2018. And I like had never performed Shakespeare like live before. I was really terrified about getting like everything right because Shakespeare has all these like rules around it. And so, like I took like all of the classes that Mary offered. I got every coaching session I possibly could, and I did like every exercise I could on my text. And I like went into rehearsal being like, I am a good Shakespearean student. And I felt pretty good about it. And then I got to a moment where I had to actually give a monologue, and I was trying to work it in rehearsal, and I was like trapped. Like I was completely stuck. My page was like overwhelmingly filled with like every possible exercise I could have done. And Meg just looked at me and said, well, what would you normally do when looking at a character? Like, what's your normal practice? Because I know you've done all this homework, but what do you do? And I am a Lecoq trained physical theater artist, and Lecoq is this physical theater pedagogy from France. And I said, well, I'd probably roll around on the ground and see like what color I am or what animal I am. And so she said, okay, well then go do that and then come back the next day and we'll try this again. And so I did that, and I came back the next day and we were able to move forward because I had sort of done my physical practice as well. And so since then, I've really tried to balance those two things where I do my homework beforehand, maybe not every single exercise. If I find that particular exercise doesn't work for me for that character. And then I marry it with my physical practice and try and come at things sort of like twofold. So like that, that's like a long answer to say I do a text-based analysis, and then I do a physical practice for my Shakespearean process.
Fantastic. And so I'm just curious, when you marry these two things, is it different when the text is different? Like, do you do first one and then the other? Do you go back and forth between them? Does it depend on the production or the specific text or the character or any of those things?
Yeah, I feel like I generally will do my text work first. That way, when I am like sort of speaking the words out loud and doing my, physical practice, I've done all my homework. I know what I'm saying. I know who I'm speaking to. I know the context of all of the lines, and then I can really play within that. So I'm usually like a text analysis first, followed up by my physical practice. But that's not like a hard and fast rule. Things change all the time depending on your shows and your characters. So while that may have worked the last couple times, I won't say that can't change in the future.
So what kind of text work do you find most fruitful?
Yeah, that's a great question. So my very favorite exercise, which I love to do, and I also use as one of my primary tools when I'm also teaching a Shakespearean class, is something called word mining, which is actually a merry exercise.
Actually, it came from some of my colleagues where I used to work at Shakespeare and Company. But anyway, go ahead. I'm happy to share, like, be a conduit for their work to you.
And Mary can definitely explain it better than me. But essentially, word mining is taking a line of Shakespeare and then like looking up the definitions of the individual words so that it becomes sort of this exploded line of like a very detailed description of every single word, so that you kind of like I sort of process it a little bit differently. And then when you go back to saying just the line as written, you have all of this like beautiful, juicy context there that's like behind all of those words. I don't know, Mary, is that a good way to
That's
explain it?
beautifully explained. Absolutely. I guess it's a little different from paraphrase, because paraphrase is something that a lot of people do. But in my experience, a paraphrase will kind of oversimplify the language. It'll kind of reduce it. Whereas this is more about like taking this language that's just packed with meaning and kind of unpacking it and seeing what all the detail is, and then allowing all of that to still be there as you kind of pack it back into Shakespeare's words.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And I think you can do this exercise like as detailed or not as you want. Like you could explode and unpack like every single word. I might not unpack every word. For example, like the word friends, like I might not need to unpack that for a given line or a given scene. Whereas like another scene, maybe friends has a slightly different meaning or connotation to it, and then I would unpack it. So it's one of those things where you could really like go as big or as little as you as you want.
Yeah, because it is very time consuming. So you have
Yeah,
to pick and choose, but it can also be really illuminating to look up the words we all know just to see what it says.
yeah. Totally. I mean, like if people are interested, I did do this exercise for the speech we're looking at today. So maybe later on in the day, I can sort of share my screen and so you can see what I I
Oh,
did with.
let's do it now. What do you
Do
think?
it
Let's take a
now.
look.
Okay, sure. I
Yeah.
was like the most nervous about this part because I was like, I hope I'm not
And as you do
doing
that,
this
here's a
wrong.
great question. What source do you use to unpack the words?
That what really depends on what I have available. Like for example, if I'm doing this at Bard, where I have like your special dictionaries and really incredible like Shakespeare resources, I will definitely use that. Although sometimes I like to just use the regular dictionary. I like to look at synonyms as well because that sometimes illuminates in a different way. So it depends on what resources I have. Considering like I was doing this from my home, I didn't have like a Shakespearean dictionary with me. So the regular dictionary worked pretty well today.
I do have a tip while you're
Oh
pulling that
yes,
up
please
for
go
BC.
ahead.
I have a couple of tips. One is for BC residents with your as long as your BC library card has the barcode on it, so the more recent ones, you can log into the Vancouver Public Library's website and access an electronic version of the full, complete Oxford English Dictionary. And that is incredible. It's wonderful. It's a treasure trove. And then another amazing resource is Shakespeare's Words by David and Ben Crystal. It's a really great Shakespeare glossary that's much more up to date than the other ones that have been published in the past. So let's take a look at this,
Awesome,
Ming.
thanks. So I just sort of I'm trying to pick a good sentence where I did a good word bind. So for example, we can look at at the top of here that I'm highlighting this line. but Brutus says he was ambitious. And I'm just going to preface that this is just my word mine. Like everyone's word mine is going to be totally different. It might not be the word mine that, Mary does or you do, but it is what worked for me when I was doing this exercise. So the line, but Brutus says he was ambitious, could be word mine to something like, but Brutus says he had a strong desire and determination for success to an excessive degree. And then, and then the next line, and Brutus is an honorable man, could be, and Brutus is a human full of integrity. Obviously said, a bit tongue in cheek in that moment. So yeah, like I've done it for this whole speech. I don't usually put things side by side like this, but I actually really loved doing this exercise on the computer in this way. It made it really easy for me to see what I was changing in a sentence. But yeah, like I love, looking at how it changes the line and contextualizes in a way that really resonates for me. And then when I say the line again, it means something different, for example, like the evil that men do lives after them, could be word mine to the profound wickedness that humans do is remembered after they die. So then when I go back and say that again, there's all of those like juicy contexts there. Just waiting.
I love that you're talking about juicy and that you talked about how it resonates for you and things like that. Because one of my favorite things about this particular exercise that I learned from my friends is how important it is to speak all of this. For each actor to start by speaking the Shakespeare, ideally to the person you're speaking to, like your scene partner. But if that's not possible, just to speak it to someone, to speak it to your mirror, to speak it to your cat, but to speak the actual Shakespeare, and then to speak the unpacked thoughts, and then to speak the Shakespeare again, but to express it in the way you as an individual expresses this, that I think is what's so important, because that's how you discover those personal and individual resonances.
Yeah, totally. And I think that's what this is really about, what you find speaks to you the most, right? Because whatever I find might not be the definition of evil that speaks to Mary, right? And so Mary's word mine of evil might be a totally different thing that really works for her. And that's great and awesome. It's all about, creating a fullness behind the words, and whatever that fullness is, like, we're never going to know. So like whatever speaks to you is the right way to do it.
Well, this is fantastic. Thanks for showing this work to us.
No worries. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
But it's so great to have the visual aid. So let's just throw in another question from an attendee here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Does that mean emphasizing certain keywords? How do you manage that whole idea of emphasis?
Yeah, I originally would go through and do sort of like break it down into your iambic pentameter, to see where the stresses on words were. And I actually found that for me personally, that confused me quite a lot. And really what I find more useful is to go through and there are just like words that are like integral to certain sentences that I know for me, I want to emphasize in order to like get my point across. So I don't necessarily follow the rule of like, okay, well, you're supposed to stress this part of the word, or this is the important word, to do with the iambic. I think for me, it's a little bit more like organic, which might not be right, but it's what works for me.
Right is not what we're up to here.
And another thing that I really like is looking at like whether or not like thoughts just like end in the middle of a sentence, I think, or middle of a line, I think are important clues. Or, if another thought goes for like a couple lines, to me, those give me more clues as to what's important in a given line than to like really break it down, but like into the iambic, for example.
I love what you've just said, because yeah, I think if your thoughts are clear as an actor of Shakespeare, then the emphasis takes care of itself. Like you don't have to think about which, I hate the expression to hit words. It just feels so violent to me, and I've just never liked that. But I also just think, it's not really what I think. I don't know, in my ideal of what actors are up to, they aren't, when they're actually rehearsing or performing, not thinking about that sort of thing. They're not thinking about when to breathe. They're not thinking about what words to emphasize. They're really just present and allowing their breath and connecting with who they're communicating with. So their scene partners, the audience, and then having clear thoughts and open hearts. And then kind of the emphasis takes care of itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, I love that. I love,
fantasy?
no, I love that, Mary. I think that's great because, we can do all this homework, but at the end of the day, it's about like connection for yourself, connection to your scene partners, connection to the context of the play that, the director has come up with. And so like the homework is all pre that, and then once it's done, you kind of just need to like know that you've done it in your head, and then allow yourself to like feel the material, feel the words, feel it, up on its feet.
So this is great. So you talked some about your text-based homework. So what's your physical practice homework look
Yeah,
like?
I was excited to talk about this. So my practice is based primarily, like as I mentioned, in the Lecoq technique, and the Lecoq technique takes inspiration from like abstract concepts and the external world, and invites you to sort of like internalize it physically, so that then you can like externalize it to the world in your performance. So, for example, it looks at a lot of things like colors are something I worked with a lot, animals, materials, elements. So oftentimes, like for example, when I was looking at this speech earlier today, the exercise I do with colors really is about sort of like closing your eyes, visualizing, let's say you're working on the color blue, visualizing your playing space turning into this color blue. Maybe it's blue painted on the floor. Maybe you're walking into like a blue light, like whatever it is for you. And then as the performer, you allow yourself to walk into that blue space and just see how it moves your body. And so I like to do that with every color of the rainbow and speak the text as I move around in the space. And eventually you'll hit a color that just speaks to that character more. And then for me, that's how I literally color my characters. uh, so for example,
How do you know, like what happens
I don't know.
when you've found the right color? Is it intuitive? Is it
It's like
physical experience, or?
it's like very intuitive, and like I would really encourage you, if you're going to look at this speech, to do an exercise like this yourself. So I don't want to like give away what color I decided Mark Antony was for this scene, but I can tell you for me, like I tried to do it in the color orange and it was like a mess. Like it didn't work at all. I don't know. It's so personal. And the color blue is going to mean something for me different than the color blue will mean for you. And that's okay. Like, it doesn't matter what color it is, as long as it works for you. So for example, this Timon of Athens monologue that I was struggling with, I went home, I did this exercise, I came back and I told Meg, okay, if I'm ever getting off track, just say, be more green. and that was the words, like the terminology she used with me, and it worked. And so every day before I went on stage, I did that monologue, and I just walked around on the stage by myself before the show started, and in the color green, and I just did that to get it in my body. Yeah.
Can you, we've had a request, can you repeat the name of this technique?
Yes, it
There's
is.
a lot of interest.
Yes, it's called the Lecoq technique. I'm gonna, if I put it in the chat, will people be able to see it?
As long as you select panelists and attendees.
Yeah, sure. It is spelt like this, Lecoq. It's Jacques Lecoq was the pioneer of this technique. It's his technique. Yeah, so I like to use, it depends on the show, like maybe a color doesn't work, maybe I'll try the elements. Sometimes I'll be working on a character and an animal will just hit me, and that's what I use as the basis of my character. So it really depends on what it is, but for me, a physical practice is super important and in how I explore a character.
And one of our attendees has put in a link. I don't know what it is, but I can share that. She put it in the Q&A.
Right.
And I think I'm sending it to the right place. I'm not as good with the chat. It's too many things for me to look at once, but hopefully that'll be helpful too.
Great.
Thank you very much for that. Okay, so here's a question from an attendee, and I'm really embarrassed about it. So the question is, did you deliberately pick to hold this speech of the week and this speech in particular on the Ides of March, or pure coincidence? It didn't occur to me until this moment, and that's why I'm embarrassed. Of course, that's so funny. Of course, it's perfect, but purely serendipity.
I love it. It was meant to be.
It was meant to be. So Ming, tell me, because when we invited our guest artists to participate, we asked you all, we had a sort of possible list of maybe these are some speeches we could do, but then we asked you all for any other suggestions. And this might have been your suggestion, I can't remember now, but why this speech for you? What drew you to this one?
Yeah, so Julius Caesar is my favorite Shakespearean play. I love this play so much. I was having a conversation with Mary and Katie about why I liked it earlier, and there's something inherently, like, for me when I read this show, there's something inherently movement based in it for me. Like, I can very clearly see in my sort of like mind's eye how I would stage this show if I were ever to direct it. And it's so movement based for me, and it sucked me in a way that I had never been sucked into a Shakespearean show before. And so when there was, when you asked, does anybody want to do any specific speeches? I was like, well, I want to do something from this show. And the Brutus and Mark Antony speeches in this funeral scene of Julius Caesar are so good. The scene is just so dynamic and beautifully written, and their arguments are so clear, and it's I really flip-flop on like whose side I am on it when I'm reading this show. Mary, you said something really great about how Shakespeare really wrote a play where what did you say? You said, I wrote it down because I thought it was so good. That Shakespeare wrote a play where he didn't take sides. And so sort of as an audience member, we don't take sides either, which I think is fascinating. Like I really flip-flop on who I think did the right thing. And like maybe at the end of the day, like no one did, or maybe everyone did the right thing. So.
And it's so interesting in these really sadly polarized and polarizing times. I think that a play like Julius Caesar or an approach like Shakespeare's is incredibly valuable and incredibly interesting. And from what we know about Shakespeare's schooling, or at least what seems likely, in part of their training was to argue like from each side of a question. And this was like one of the big classic questions. And so actually one of our attendees is asking a question about that. Do you also consider the historical perspective around Mark Antony? For example, the fact that many in Shakespeare's audience would have studied Cicero, they would have studied rhetoric, and that's exactly it. In their school, this was one of the classic things that they would argue, whether or not Brutus and Cassius and the other conspirators were right to assassinate Caesar. And they would have to argue both sides, and they'd have to argue both sides of everything. And I can't help thinking nowadays how much better the world would be if that was part of our schooling and training as well, that we would have to, you know, really fully immerse ourselves in both sides of questions and argue both sides. What do you think about that?
Oh, I love it. I love it. You know, I just think that, I think it's, you know, I think that the Brutus and Mark Antony are such beautiful orators in this uh, this scene. And I think it, you know, if everyone had to argue both sides of the coin in all of our decision making, I think we would have a lot less like extreme reactions to things. I think we would have a lot more empathy and measured actions, which I certainly think we could use these days.
Here's another question from an attendee.
Yes.
Who says it is difficult to pin down any of the characters in this tragic history, but Antony is hardly the heroic protagonist, rather just happens to be on the winning side by the end. How would you describe his role and how it relates to this pivotal speech?
Ooh, yeah. I mean, I think, Mary, you were sort of speaking about that just now. You know, he isn't a good protagonist. Like, no one in this play is a good protagonist. Kind of everyone's a little bit not great. You know, there's not really very many sympathetic characters in this play at all. Like maybe Calpurnia, like Caesar's wife, is sympathetic, but she like might be the only one. It's just a lot of characters who think that they have the right answer, and they're going to go to the extreme to do what they think is right without like a consideration of anybody else. So like, you know, even Caesar like isn't a you know your typical protagonist either. Like kind of no one is. So to me, I think that like what's really pivotal in this scene especially is this push and pull between the two sort of like anti-heroes that we have, between your Brutus and your Mark Antony. They're, you know, they are manipulating really the people of Rome with their words to come onto their side. And what's pivotal is that, like, you know, at the end of the day, Anthony can just, he just kind of out speeches Brutus. Like there's not really, it's like, you're right. He's not a heroic protagonist. You're totally right.
It's so interesting when you look at the speeches side by side. I mean, one of the sort of most obvious differences between them is Brutus's speeches in prose and Antony's speeches in verse. And if you think about classical rhetoric for a moment, if you think of the sort of, oh shoot, what is it called? Is it called meta rhetoric? Anyway, the like basic thing of looking at logos, ethos, and pathos, the appeal to reason, the appeal based on my character, and the tug at the heartstrings. Brutus definitely does the first two, but he doesn't do pathos. He doesn't tug at the heartstrings at all. And Antony, oh my goodness, he's a master of it.
He's like, come around the body and let me tell you about why like Caesar was such a good guy, and like holding up his like torn clothes and saying like, this is where he was stabbed by this person. Like it's very manipulative.
Or
like,
bear with me, my heart is in the coffin there with Caesar, and I must pause till it come back to me.
Like or like saying, oh, Caesar left a will, and it says good things about all of you, but I'm not gonna. I couldn't possibly tell you what's in it. So you're right. He does use a very different tactic in his word choices than Brutus does.
So there's some great questions about characters in Julius Caesar. So let's see, where do we want to start? So this is triggered by the thought that the only sympathetic character might be Calpurnia. Do you think this play contributes any to the conversation around toxic masculinity? Is there a prototype for masculinity in this play?
Oh, what was interesting is we were talking, Mary, if you can answer this maybe first, but I was thinking, if I ever did this show, I might not want to do it with any men, any like male identifying performers at all. Like I might actually just want to challenge like what, to challenge those sort of like gender roles, because I think that, women or female identifying humans have like absolutely the same ability to be as like ruthless and powerful and all of these words, for Julius Caesar, like good speakers, and they like women have the power to do that as well. And so I would love to try and do this show where maybe there weren't any male identifying performers on stage, just to sort of see what we can challenge in that.
Yeah, and I think the play lends itself really well to thinking about it outside of the confines of gender at all. Because if you just look at it as they're senators, and there are two marriages in the play, but those don't have to be bound by any particular genders either. And so I think that becomes really interesting. Another question was, who would you like to play in Julius Caesar? Is it Mark Antony or someone else? If it's someone else, who and why? Or, is it for you, is it all about directing it, or would you be happy to do both? Or what do you think?
Oh, I would love to be anybody in this show. I find the character of Brutus really fascinating, to have essentially your dad, like someone you consider to be like a father figure, but like he believes so strongly in this, that Caesar's gonna turn democracy on its head, that he's like willing to kill someone he considers to be his father. And I think that's a really interesting journey. But that being said, overall, I really do look at this play, and I have like sort of the vision of not just one character, but all of them. And so for me, like I would love to sometime in my career, like it would be such an honor to be able to direct this show.
Cool. And one of our attendees is mentioning a production that was done in the UK that was set in a women's prison. So the setting was, there's a lot of Shakespeare that's happening in prisons nowadays. And so this was not that, but rather a professional production. I can't remember what theater it was, but Harriet Walter played Brutus. And but the setting was that they were doing Julius Caesar in a women's prison. So all the characters were played by the women.
I love that.
So you haven't seen it?
I haven't seen it.
I haven't either. I've read about it, but that's all.
Oh, I think that's really interesting because, it's, it can be set anywhere with anyone you can be set anywhere with like anyone playing any role, because it's such universal relationships, right? Essentially, it's like two factions think one person is either doing the right or the wrong thing, and they do an action. So it's like that can be set anywhere in time. It can be set in any location you want, with any combination of performers in it, and it would work because it's such a universal theme. I was speaking to Mary about this earlier, about how, like, this isn't technically a history, like one of Shakespeare's histories. But if you look at like even the like British history, this happens over and over and over again, where just someone thinks that the king is doing something wrong, and so they murder him and decide they're going to do a better job. So it's been happening throughout time. So I find it a really timeless show, which is why it's also, I think, so translatable to nowadays as well.
Absolutely. So we have a question about, although I will mention one of our attendees is saying, Bard, please hire Ming to direct an all-female Julius Caesar. That makes me happy. Thank you for that.
I mean, I would love that. So
we will take that idea back. I love it. So a question about the speech, and a really good point about it. A lot of the text is omitted. Yeah. The speech, for those of you who have, a copy of the play on hand, you'll notice that we have in our handout cut a ton. So Ming, do you have any ideas, opinions, advice about why we may have chosen to do that?
Well, I mean, like, I think primarily it's because it's actually a combination of Mark Antony has a few speeches in that scene. And so we've cut who I consider to be the third character from the scene, which is the crowd. And so you have the crowd interjecting all throughout Mark Antony's speech, usually saying things like, "Those traitors," or like, "Let him speak," or they'll interrupt him and then he'll talking again. They'll say like, no, he's talking now. I mean, so primarily I think we cut it down because it isn't one full speech. I think that Julius Caesar, it is my favorite show, but like one of the things that I would want to streamline if I were ever to direct the show is there are just 7,000 characters, and sometimes like they don't appear until like the last scene, or sometimes they're only there for the first scene and you never see them again. So I think it's also, for me, streamlining also sometimes can help with clarity of story.
Yeah, and for speech of the week, I would say that I wouldn't sort of throw 136 lines of a speech to anyone to try to tackle. And certainly in this context where we just want to, welcome everybody to play. And then I also think of poor Melanie trying to edit together a 136 line speech. And so no, we've come up with 27 lines that I think are a fairly good arc of a beginning, middle, and end. But there are any number of different versions that could be crafted from those 136 lines, and that's part of what the delight is for a director when they're preparing a script for a production, is making those decisions. How are you going to cut this play? And Julius Caesar presents amazing opportunities because of everything you were just saying. I mean, all of those characters get introduced once we get to Philippi. Oh my goodness. But Ming, I want to ask, so what advice do you have for our folks who are going to be looking at the speech for themselves and making it their own, because they don't have that character of the crowd that they're speaking to? Do you have anything that you would say might help them in their process?
Yeah, I suppose, when I was walking, okay, so this being said, like I think you should, like, whatever text works for you. I think like having some sense of like knowing what you're saying is super helpful as a starting place. Physicalization doesn't necessarily work for everybody, but it does for me. I would challenge you to give it a try. Imagining a color in your head, opening your eyes, seeing your room filled with that color, and then walking in it while you're saying the lines to see if something resonates with you. But also, like, at the end of the day, this is a speech, a political speech given to a crowd. And so for me, when I was working on this speech, it really was helpful to imagine that even if they weren't giving me, like verbal words back, that I was talking to many people, like I was talking to a multitude of people. I think a lot about, we've just watched a lot of in American politics, many political speeches recently. And I just think about, what would it be like if this was set nowadays and it was on C-SPAN and there was like, you had your allotted time to say your bit. And so you're just trying to be as passionate as you can, even if, no one is giving you lines in between. I think that's like my first hit in terms of like what advice I would give. Did I even answer your question, Mary?
Absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. And I'm just thinking, like, one of my favorite things to advise people is, when actors who are working on text, that you are speaking to someone. And so obviously when we're, looking into the void, I'm really happy I can see your face, Ming. But if I were, recording myself on my phone or whatever, it's just looking at my phone. But to imagine that I am speaking to someone and to have as much detail as possible. So that's, I think, one thing that's really interesting when you're talking about the crowd and you were talking about how you imagined, like, and what they say to each other and things like that. Like, I would advise people to, like, decide how many people there are and what are their ages and how are they dressed and why are they there? Like, what do they want out of this? And how are you going to communicate specifically for them? How are you going to meet their needs and therefore meet your own, kind of thing? Even if it is just looking at your phone. Like, I remember hearing about, this is going to seem strange, I don't know why this just came into my head, but I remember hearing that Ronald Reagan, at the very beginning of his career, he was like a radio announcer for sports or something. And he was apparently just amazing at it. But what he did was he imagined very specifically talking to someone as he was talking into the microphone. He had like this person in his life or whatever, and he was talking to them. And so I guess the listeners, they just felt like this person was really talking to me. So I don't know if that's helpful or not.
I love it.
Another question from an attendee asks for your opinions about Cicero, who's a character that often gets cut. But do you recall the scene that Cicero is in? And
you know what, I don't. But then I was going to be like, Mary definitely will. So Mary, can you enlighten all of us?
There isn't a lot. I mean, mostly what I remember is what Casca says in that scene, because it's when Casca comes in with that, "Oh, Cicero, I have seen tempests where the scolding winds have rived the knotty oaks, and I have seen the ambitious ocean swell and rage and foam," and all of that, the tempest dropping fire stuff. And so Cicero appears in that, and I think they mentioned Cicero in the conspirator scene in Brutus's garden. And then we hear that Cicero's been killed. But Cicero, of course, is like this icon of classical Roman history, but only has this sort of, like, we get these few glimpses of Cicero in the play. Okay, so that's all I know.
Okay, so my initial impulse in that, which is a great question, because I was like, man, what scene is Cicero in? Is probably that, like, I think it's okay to sort of, like, especially with some of these smaller characters, to maybe like fudge who is in a room. So maybe it's not like Cicero that's being like told about the tempest. Maybe it's like someone that we see a bit more. Like, I really feel, if we can make it make sense. Okay, just in general, I have a bit of a philosophy where I think that, like, every person on stage should feel really important, and that every performer, I don't know, like, I kind of prefer, like, okay, I'm going to steal from a little bit from Meg again, but with Timon of Athens, Meg kind of did that. She, like, made there be, like, some of the characters were like kind of amalgamations of a few characters to make that one part be like a lot more meaty. And I think that if you can make it work, I really like that, because I think it, you know, sometimes it's fun to play like 700 different tiny characters, but I think that if you have the opportunity to have 12 people on stage who have 12 really meaty parts, like I would be inclined to try and do that. So maybe Cicero isn't in it, but let's say like, you know, Casca is, and so we give that, you know, we make some smaller parts become just one big Casca part, if that makes sense.
Makes total sense to me. And I think one of the other interesting things about Caesar that some of our attendees have referred to is, you know, some, not all, but some of Shakespeare's audience will have had this grammar school education where they were steeped in ancient Greek and Roman history. So they would have read Cicero in Latin. They would have, you know, so there are these reference points that they may have been familiar with when they came to hear the play, that they would have brought with him, that our audiences just don't have anymore. And so I don't know, in my book, I just think, well, let's lose those, because
totally.
We're creating theater for our audiences today. So what are our reference points that everyone is, or most people will get, will appreciate, will understand, and will resonate for them?
Yeah, absolutely.
Without having to read like, you know, a study guide before you come and see a performance.
Yeah, I would rather present people with like 12 characters that they've never heard of, but that are really meaty and have like a lot of like juiciness to them, as opposed than like put in some cameo from someone that like we don't really, you know, necessarily feel anything about.
Mm-hmm. So Ming, as you look at this speech, are there parts that you especially love, that you find especially juicy?
I love. Okay, I love when he like dramatically like holds up the mantle and is like, you know, I spoke about it earlier, where he's like pointing out where each person stabbed, like which stab wounds were from each person, and then going into this like very dramatic thing about like, oh, and Brutus's was the worst at all because, you know, because like Caesar could feel his ingratitude, and then he essentially died of a broken heart, is like what he's saying, you know, like his heart
burst his mighty heart.
Yeah, like his heart exploded. Oh, I love that. I love that so much. One, I love a good list in Shakespeare. And so a good list of stab wounds is like even better.
And I can't help, like, the director in me wants to ask the actor playing Antony, so how do you know this? Like, do you know that is the hole that this conspirator made, and this is the hole that this assassin made? I mean, what's the answer to that question?
I mean, for my money, of course not. Like,
of course not. They took Antony away so he couldn't see this. He wasn't part of it. So he's totally making this up.
I know, he's so melodramatic.
And so the question is, why? To what end? Like, what does this serve? And it's really powerful and really interesting.
Well, because you are looking at a bloody cloth, and you've just heard this huge speech about how great great Caesar was, and then you hear about every single person that stabbed him, where they did it, what Caesar might have been thinking in the moments that he was stabbed by that person. Like, I love it. It's just, it's pure manipulation, and I am here for it.
So finally, if anybody else has questions, please throw them our way in the Q&A. One question I have is, I think it can be a challenge, I think, if people are trying to sort of think of everything that Antony's trying to have in mind or trying to accomplish, like right at the start of the speech. Like, I think it's really tempting to think that Shakespeare characters like think up everything before they start speaking, and then they express it all. So do you have any advice for actors that helps disempower that idea?
You know, like Shakespearean characters really think on the line. Like, they really there's not a lot of like subtext that isn't like in the line itself. So just like enjoying the words, like all the clues you need are in the words. Like you really don't need to do a lot of like digging on your own, because Shakespeare already thought of that. um for this speech in particular, I think like the important things for me that Mark Antony are doing in this speech is, one, he's like gaining everybody's trust at the beginning of it, because he's like, oh, I couldn't, like these are such good men and I couldn't possibly like say anything bad about them. So he's sort of like trying to he's like being a bit of the good guy, trying to get people on his side. And he's like, okay, well, I suppose if you're forcing me to tell you about them, well, now I'm going to just like show this bloody mantle. So it's like, he's like gaining their trust, trying to like really come off as like a really good person. And then he's trying to speak to their feelings and their emotions, and to, like you said earlier, Mary, like tug on their heartstrings. Like he's sort of reeling them in, and then he's sort of like cracking them open, and like trying to play with their heart.
Excellent. Excellent. So, we have one final question just coming in under the wire. People had only recently become Protestant. So would you consider the Bloody Mantle episode to signify veiled references to sainthood, Thomas a Becket, etc., speaking to the emotions of the current Elizabethan audience?
Oh, that's super interesting.
Isn't it?
Yeah, I like, what, I hadn't really put that together. Like, I'm definitely not saying that Shakespeare like wasn't considering things, because like who knows what he was thinking. Kind of what Mary was saying about things speaking to our audiences like today. I feel like I am much more interested in like, it being like an actual bloody mantle, like maybe just like a little bit less like veiled. Like for me, it's like a really straightforward image. It doesn't mean I'm right, but I certainly wouldn't expect one of our current audience members to like, that was a very intelligent question, and I'm sure lots of people are super smart, but like as me, as an audience member, I wouldn't have put that together. So I wouldn't want to put too much weight into something if like, the majority of people aren't going to quite understand the context to it.
That's one of my favorite things about Shakespeare, right? Is that the resonances, like, they just go on and on and on, and each of us as individuals, it's gonna resonate uniquely for each of us. And then when we collectively come together, those resonances amplify and bounce off one another. And that's why we love theater, isn't it?
Yeah.
Ming, thank you so much for being a part of it.
Thanks.
We have to close out for today. Go ahead, say something.
I was gonna say, like, thank you everybody who was here. I am super acknowledged that like all of our processes are really different from each other, and like my process is really uniquely mine. So I just, in sort of offering, my perspective, I like hope that it gives people the license to find what works for them, because at the end of the day, it's what works for you. So yeah, if you want to give something physical a try, you might try it and be like, this doesn't work for me at all, and that's fine. I don't mind if it doesn't work for you. But it might, and it might offer you just like a little bit of extra fodder for your creativity. So yeah, I am just really grateful to have been here. I hope that some of what I said out of my mouth made sense.
Oh, we love it, Ming, and we love you. Thank you so much. It's so many resonances for me about this play and about this speech and about just creativity in general. I'm all abuzz. So friends, thank you so much for coming. I want to take a moment to encourage everyone to come on to our working session on Thursday, because it's really fun, and to share your work with us because we adore seeing it. And also just a reminder that 2 weeks from this evening will be we'll do our final webinar for this round of Speech of the Week. So all the details for the upcoming Speech of the Week events are on our website at bardonthebeach.org. I want to thank once again Blue Shore Financial. Thank once again, big thanks to Katie and Mel and everyone at Bard. Thank you to the brilliant Ming Hudson and to all of you. Until next time, farewell.
Thank you, Mary. Thanks, everyone.